Welcome, everyone, to our first meeting of the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara for 2026. We are a 501c3 educational nonprofit, 100% volunteer run, founded about 30 years ago. My name's Judy Flattery. I'm the president of the society. Let me tell you a little bit about our speaker. His talk today is When Race Becomes Our Faith. Based on the book that he co-wrote with Glenn Bracey, The Religion of Whiteness, How Racism Distorts Christian Faith. Dr. Michael Emerson is a fellow in religion and public policy at Rice University. He's had a distinguished career. He's published widely in the area of religion and public policy issues, recently serving as the PI, the principal investigator, of the largest ever national study of religion and race. He's authored 15 books, nearly 100 other publications. His research, his expertise have been featured in hundreds of media outlets, including the CBS Evening News, NPR, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, the New York Times, and USA Today. He was the founding director of Rice University's Center on Race, Religion, and Urban Life, and he's the co-founding director of Rice's Kinder Institute for Urban Research. His work focuses on understanding how religion and public policy interact, both here and abroad. He seeks to share his work with policymakers and other leaders, thus creating networks of dialogue and action. But first, before I turn it over to him, I want to think about why would humanists care to hear about a talk on this subject? So I looked, as I often do, to the Affirmations of Humanism by Paul Kurtz, and there's two that really speak to this. And one is that we as humanists attempt to transcend divisive parochial loyalties based on race, religion, gender, nationality, creed, class, sexual orientation, or ethnicity, and we strive to work together for the good of humanity. And secondly, we are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and with eliminating discrimination and intolerance. Welcome, Dr. Emerson.
Yeah, thank you. Great to see you all. Thanks for joining us here. I'm actually, though I work in Houston, I'm actually in Minneapolis, where it's a nice 8 degrees currently, where madness, as you may have heard on the news, is certainly happening. I'm going to talk a little bit about a national study that we've done and some of the findings. Certainly we'll have time for questions after. So let me just say that this is based on a national study that we did, but it's also part of an even larger study that we're doing of movements that are happening around the globe. What I'm going to focus on specifically with our time together is race and Christianity and how those are operating in our country currently. And the main argument is going to be this, that racial injustice isn't just there, but it's actually fuel that is sustaining an alternative religion, this religion of whiteness that I will describe. That this religion must have the injustice, so it will do whatever it can to preserve it. Ultimately, then the argument is that race in our country has become religionized. It's not just a category, but it actually has religious meaning. So race has become a faith for many, many people in our country, and it causes very deep damage and trauma. Like I said, I'm in Minneapolis right now, and we're watching it unfold before our eyes, some of the outcomes of the things I'll talk about today. So I'm going to use a term, practicing Christian, quite a bit. And so I want to be very clear, what do I mean by practicing Christian? So these are people in our surveys and when we interview them in person that say, I am a Christian, that say my faith is very important to me, and that attend worship at least monthly. That's the practicing part. So anytime I say practicing Christian, it will mean all three of these are true. So how, when race becomes our faith, does it matter? I'm going to go through about 7 different ways. First of all, it shapes how people will interpret the scriptures that they say guide them. I'll give you an example. We did an experiment with about 3,000 randomly sampled Americans, and we first asked them, should the Bible be used to determine what is right or wrong? Now, only for the folks that said yes, always use the Bible to determine right and wrong, which is about half of Americans, Did they get these next questions? There's four of them. So I want to share just a little bit what it is that they got. So what we did was we actually took verses or phrases from the Bible and then we would repeat it. So this one here, in the system of laws that God gave the Israelites to follow, there were laws that protected foreigners from being treated unjustly. We tell them where it's from. They could hyperlink and click on it if they want to read it. And then we would simply restate it. Therefore, it's good to have laws that protect foreigners from being treated unjustly. They can strongly agree to strongly disagree on each of these. Another one, in the Bible, the prophet Nehemiah confessed sins committed by himself, his nation, and his ancestors. Therefore, it is good to confess sins committed by myself, by my nation, and by my ancestors. The first Christians listened to the complaints of an ethnic minority group that was being treated unjustly and empowered leaders within that minority group to correct the injustice. Therefore, it is good to do that. And then finally, in the Bible, the Apostle Paul taught that people should not use unwholesome words. Therefore, it is bad to use unwholesome words. So I just want you to notice that those first three questions that we had either have to do with things that benefit other groups other than your own, or with confessing your own group's sin. Whereas the last question, which is our control question, and I'll explain that in a moment, is just about individual action or personal piety. So what did we find? Well, first of all, I just want to point out that in this particular instance, it isn't the case for all of them, but in this particular one, we had too few cases for Asian and Native responses, so I'm not going to report those here. So for the first three questions that had to do with other groups or your own group's sin, the majority of African American practicing Christians and the majority of Hispanic practicing Christians strongly agreed that is what the Bible says. But for white practicing Christians, only a third agreed. Now, keep in mind, we're only asking people who said you must always use the Bible to determine right or wrong. We had a control question to see, well, are white practicing Christians and everybody else always different? And what we found when it had nothing to do with other groups, that there was no difference. The majority of every group agreed that's what the Bible says and what you should do. When race becomes faith, it shapes how we see history. It shapes our interpretation of it. Just a couple of examples. We asked, the U.S. has been oppressive to minorities. Again, this is practicing Christians. What percent agreed? 75% of African American practicing Christians agreed. Over 60% of Hispanic practicing Christians agreed. But less than 40% of white practicing Christians agreed. So the majority said that's not the case. The U.S. has not been oppressive to minorities in our past. We also asked this, generations of slavery and discrimination have created conditions that make it difficult for African Americans to work their way out of the lower class. The majority of all groups, whether they were Christian, not Christian, including non-Christian whites, agreed that is the case. But we had one exception. That was white practicing Christians, where a full 60% disagree that that is the case. So they're very different than everybody else. When race becomes our faith, it shapes how we see the present, not just the past, not just how we interpret scripture, but how we view what's going on in the world right now. We asked a series, this is 9 different questions, but I'm going to present it as one because we found the exact same thing in each. So it'll seem a little bit busy here, but that's because I'm just putting together in one statement 9 different questions. Do you think that various groups are treated less fairly in hiring, in pay, in promotions, in housing, in mortgages, in the criminal justice system? Like I said, these were separated, but we found the same thing for each. And what did we find? The majority of Asians, African Americans, Hispanics, whether Christian or not Christian, agreed with all of these. Half of non-Christian whites agreed, but one group again stood out. White practicing Christians were about 2/3 disagreed with all of these, that there is no unfair treatment in any area of U.S. society. Do racial minorities use racism as an excuse for economic inequalities? The majority of all groups disagree, except white practicing Christians, where over 70% believe that is exactly what's happening. Racial minorities are making excuses for why they have less than white folks. We took 15 different measures, put them all together into what we call a racial prejudice index. One of the questions would be, I am fearful of other races. Put them together and then look at all the different groups. The highest scoring group by far, nobody came close, no other group, was white practicing Christians. We can use fancy statistics to see, well, is it really because you're a white practicing Christian? Could it be because you are a Republican? Could it be because of your age or educational level or what part of the country you live in? None of those factors accounted for this difference. It was because of this religion. When race becomes our faith, it also shapes what we think should be done. Should people from minority groups work their way up without any special favors? The majority of all groups of color disagree. Half of non-Christian whites agree, half disagree. But over 2/3 of white practicing Christians agree. So again, they stand out even from other white folks. For only one group does the majority believe that American way of life needs protecting from foreign influences. White practicing Christians. And we can see that playing out politically day by day here. For only one group does the majority believe that we should have stricter limits on the number of legal immigrants. So not talking about illegal here, but legal immigrants. And again, that's white practicing Christians. For only one group does the majority believe that some cultures have inherently better morals than others. That's white practicing Christians. So there are Christians of all kinds of backgrounds, but it's only the white practicing Christians that would assent to this, that our culture has better morals than everybody else. Only one Christian group does not believe that race relations can be improved by teaching about race in the church. Kind of a surprise. White practicing Christians, 2/3 say that's not the answer, whereas all other Christian groups say that is the answer. So what do white practicing Christians think is the answer? Well, they're the only group that says the answer is everybody needs to convert to Christianity. What's kind of ironic about that is they'll even say that about fellow Christians of different racial backgrounds. Basically say we need to convert to the Christianity that we have. When race becomes our faith, that shapes our very identity. Let me give you a couple of examples here. Unlike any other groups where there are no differences, white practicing Christians are twice as likely than other whites to say that being white, not being Christian, but being white, is extremely important to how they think about themselves. They're twice as likely to say they often feel the need to defend their racial group. And they're twice as likely to agree that it is acceptable for whites to have more wealth than others. I got to read that one again. Twice as likely as other white folks to agree that it is acceptable for whites to have more wealth than others. We followed up on that to ask people, why do you think that is? And common responses were, the wealth that we have is because we have followed God, we are obedient, we are faithful, and so we are financially blessed. And that's why it's okay. It's because it's God ordained. When race becomes our faith, it shapes even how we feel. Let me give you an example here. So we asked not just like, what do people think, but actually, how do they feel? And they were given a set of emotions that they could choose from. And we gave them some phrases and asked them to choose up to 3 emotions that they felt when they see those words put together. Now, they could also write in whatever they wanted if they didn't see in this list you see right now. If they didn't like any of those, they could write in what they wanted. So, for example, we said, how do you feel when you see white privilege? Just see that phrase. White practicing Christians express more positive emotions than any other group, more than other whites, more than any Christian group that was not white. They expressed positive. They were proud of white privilege. 4 more, Black power, social justice, undocumented immigrants, reparations. White practicing Christians express more negative emotions than any other group. And the most common feeling or emotion was anger. When they saw those terms, it made them angry. Now, I said people could also write in. So even though they could choose angry and often did, they would also then write angry again, always with an exclamation point. Disgusted, idiotic, irritated, you can see those. They even would sometimes cuss, even though earlier in the survey they had told us, don't use unwholesome words. That's how emotional they got about this. So what's the implication that we find this consistent difference white practicing Christians different from every other group, even their own racial group that isn't a practicing Christian? What's going on? Well, we argue in this book that there is indeed something else happening, a distortion of Christianity so far away from that we say it's a different religion, the religion of whiteness. And I will take a few minutes to tell you what we mean by that. But that is our answer to what is going on. So, the religion of whiteness, we define it this way: it's a system of beliefs and practices. All religions do that. They have beliefs, they have practices. That does what? It worships or venerates whiteness rather than some other form of a god, and then declares profane or negative or bad all things that are not associated with whiteness. So, like I said, it's a disfiguring of historical Christianity that's so disfigured, it is a different religion. If you're familiar with Old Testament teaching or Hebrew teaching, Jewish teaching, it's the same as trying to worship both the God of the Hebrews and then foreign gods at the same time, trying to practice two different religions. In short, you can just summarize it this: the race becomes our faith. It is what is worshiped. Now, we used many different statistical techniques, many different ways to try and study it, and we always got the same answer. A full 2/3 of all white practicing Christians, and there are millions in the U.S., subscribe to this religion. Even when we had where they could choose between historical Christianity and this religion of whiteness, 2/3 choose the religion of whiteness. What do I mean by whiteness? We have a very simple definition. It's just some white people, along with supporters of other backgrounds, you don't necessarily have to be white, and the dominance of white people. That's whiteness. Willie Jennings, who's a professor at Yale, I think he has a nice way of saying it. It's a way of perceiving the world and ordering the world by the perception of your distorted place within it. Whiteness includes the power then to place that distorted perception on other people and make it a reality. Ultimately, when we talk about the religion of whiteness, what is being worshiped? It is the collective effervescence, the thrill, the power you feel when you come together to worship. Something like if you've ever been to a big concert or a football game and you feel the excitement of the crowd. It's that, the power that comes together when they come to worship in a white congregation, a white church. Now, I want to give you a little bit, because I know it's kind of abstract, so I want to make it more concrete. All religions have sacred symbols. Okay, that's what ultimately they use to represent what is being worshipped. So in the religion of whiteness, we have three major sacred symbols. A white Jesus, Jesus must be white, the merging of the cross and the flag, and then increasingly firearms as the demonstration of the way to defend this religion. This is Jesus in the religion of whiteness, not unfamiliar probably to any of us. None of these can be Jesus. When we showed these to religion of whiteness followers, they either got very angry and said this is heretical, or they laughed, like this is so ridiculous. Jesus looks like this, everybody knows it. Jesus cannot look anything like any of these. Increasingly, this is kind of a long-standing, right, in the U.S., the cross and the flag becoming almost merged. In the case of this is somebody's front yard that I drove by, they are the same thing, the cross and the flag. And we said increasingly firearms, right? Jesus muzzling a AK-47. These are kind of common shirts you'll see among some of the followers. Family, faith, friends, flag, firearms, 5 things you don't mess with. If you want to mess with family, faith, friends, flags, the firearms will come out. And then ultimately put them all together. Jesus, the United States, the flag, the politics, it all becomes one. 6 beliefs I want to show you. Just so you know, what are the beliefs? Because all religions have beliefs, all religions have practices. So let me just quickly show you what we argue they are. So, not surprisingly, belief number 1, a commitment to whiteness, that it is superior, that it gives benefits, it's powerful, it's ordained, and it's blessed by God. Therefore, very different than historical teachings of Christianity, God is on the side of the dominant group, the winners in this world, the ones that have the most economic power. If you wonder, like, how can white practicing Christians so support Donald Trump, for example? Because he's the ultimate representation of this. He is a winner. He'll tell you he's a winner. So he must be blessed by God then. This one's maybe the most important belief because so much rides on this that whiteness is universal. Any of us that grow up white in the US will have some of this because it's everywhere. So that's the idea that being white is normative, it's unseen, right? I don't say I'm white, other people are not white. So here's the way it works. Jesus is universal. That is the basic Christian teaching. Jesus is for everybody. But Jesus is white. We already established that. Jesus in the religion of whiteness is white. If Jesus is universal and Jesus is white, that means the universal is white, and white is the universal. Everything else is a sideshow. Everything else is sidetracked on the side. Whiteness and universal, the core, what is right, all become one. Therefore, you will then center white understandings, theology, and so on. So you don't have white theology, but you can have black theology. Because white theology is theology because that's already been established. That's the universal. Well, we see this every day, and part of why I'm in Minneapolis is we're watching that happen. We had a white Christian nationalist demonstration for multiple hours here today at the state capitol in Minnesota, fusing Christian symbols with American civic life and allegiance to what they will say American identity, but it becomes a white American become the same thing. So that's a strong belief of this religion. And then, interestingly, not a doctrine of everybody else's inferiority, a doctrine of black inferiority. If you think of the bookends, white, black. But what that does then is that everybody else has to be negotiating. They can try to make themselves closer to white, and then whites can use that for their advantage. But always they're assumed and are otherized, and they have to spend their time trying to figure out how do I fit in this society. Now, 5 practices and one I'm going to illustrate for you. So the first one, highly selective use of Christian biblical scriptures. My initial example where we had the 4 different questions we asked them, we were actually testing that. And that's exactly what we found. When the Christian scriptures contradict the teachings of the religion of whiteness, then 2/3 of practicing white Christians say that that's not what the Bible says. Okay, so that's what we mean by the highly selective use. The second one is a fancy term, the epistemology of ignorance. Epistemology is how we come to know. So this is saying how we come to not know. So let me give you an example of that. We did a survey in late summer of 2019 where we asked this: does the United States has a race problem? It's a statement, then we asked, do you agree or not agree? So percent agreeing. Practicing white Christians, 38%. Practicing black Christians, 78%. If I showed you Asian, Hispanic, they're much closer to black Christians. But for simplicity, I'll just compare these two groups. Not unexpected, big difference. But if you remember, in 2020, we had major racial upheaval, the summer of 2020, again, in a way kicking off, unfortunately, here in Minneapolis again with the killing of George Floyd. And it was on news, it was on social media, just kind of racial unrest everywhere in the United States. So we had what we call a natural experiment here. We could go back into the field and repeat this survey, which we did a year later. Again, because of everything that had happened in the summer of 2020, we wanted to see if something changed here. Our prediction was a little odd. So let me go back here for a second. The epistemology of ignorance would say that the more that we say there's a race problem, the more the practitioners of the religion of whiteness have to say, no, there's not. I don't see it. So this is our test. Summer of 2019, summer of 2020. Practicing black Christians, even more said we have a race problem, but look for practicing white Christians. It went down because they're applying this epistemology of ignorance. Even though it's everywhere now, suddenly less practicing white Christians think we have a race problem. And just for importance, this is the only group that we saw a decline. Everybody else, as we would expect, increased. Veneration of sacred symbols, we've already kind of talked about that a little bit. Actively protecting whiteness. Whenever it's threatened, it will institute a number of defenses. And then finally, opposing Christians of color, because race is the dominant idea, not Christianity, and actually opposing other whites who will not or do not subscribe or bow down to this religion of whiteness. You will have your faith questioned, you will be mocked, you will have your beliefs and your practices, they'll be marginalized, you'll be called unchristian, a heretic, an enemy of God, a sellout, whatever. There's all kinds of terms. You'll be called woke. That's the latest. But interestingly and importantly, there's actually two different and distinct groups within this religion of whiteness, and it matters. So let me show you what we found. 75% of these millions of folks practicing this religion in the United States are what we call the white veil group. So they will present themselves as constantly saying they don't see whiteness, they don't see race. If you think about the mantra, there is no whiteness, there is no white privilege, there's no racial inequality, there's just people. Say it over and over and over again. And that way, there is no racial inequality. As we said, there's no injustice. It works really well for the most part, just to say it's not there. But when you have times like right now or in 2020, what happens? You get the second group that you then notice, which is about 25%, the white might group, the foot soldiers of this religion, the ones that will actually storm capitals, that will march, that will sign up for ICE. They see whiteness everywhere. I'm not making this up. In our surveys, they see it everywhere, and always it's white people under attack by everybody else. And so they see it as their Christian duty, their religious duty to defend whiteness. Hence why we found more rowers see themselves as having to defend being white and why white is so important to them. What's really important here is the white might group is substantially younger than the white veil group, at least on average 10 years younger. So the younger folks coming into this Christianity are often quickly coming into this religion of whiteness instead and being used as the foot soldiers. So this row, the religion of whiteness, is a clear roadblock for us as a nation. It has to be addressed. We can't ignore it. We can't just pretend that religion doesn't matter. And it does. It's shaping everything. It's impacting people's lives and communities. I'm not going to go into great detail. We go into much more detail in the book. We can talk about it. But I just want to suggest this with an image. As the U.S., when we use a GPS, the brilliant thing about a GPS is as long as we can tell it where we're going, it doesn't really matter if we make wrong turns. It will just simply correct and then guide us to it, right? So the key for us as a nation is that we've gotten off course, yes, but we've also lost our way to know where we're trying to get to. That's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to create a new narrative about who we are and who we are not, and that can help guide us to get where we need to go.
Yeah, thank you. That's a lot to absorb and take in. We had one question in the chat from Marion asking for these groups, the white practicing Christians, do they actually believe that Christ was Jewish?
So they will say he was from that area, but because Jesus is white, they have a hard time saying he was a Jewish man. Yeah. So that's the difficulty. The only way they can do it is to argue that Jewish folks back then looked more like Europeans.
Not a question, just a comment. I had heard someone regarding what Jesus looked like saying because he was Semitic, he probably looked a lot more like Yasser Arafat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would think so.
Can you tell us a little bit? I know it's a little bit off topic, but I mean, we're all curious about what's going on in Minneapolis. Can you share some of your personal observations or thoughts that you've had
Yeah.
and how long you've been there, what you've seen?
Yeah, I've been here for a few weeks now. There was an interesting graph put into the main paper in this area is called the Minneapolis Star Tribune. And what they did was they graphed the number of police officers in Minneapolis, the number in St. Paul, and the number in each suburb. And the total number of all police in this entire metropolitan area do not equal the number of ICE agents that are here currently. So even if all the police were to try to counter what ICE is doing, they would be outnumbered already. The thought here is, and I'm sorry to get political, but that Trump is trying to pick a fight right now. He really just detests Walls because he ran against him and mocked him, and that he's using this and he's trying to raise the temperature in hopes that there will be a fight so he can send in even more troops. So we'll see. It gets scary every day. We see people disappear all the time in the neighborhoods. ICE agents are getting nastier. Instead of like asking you to move now, they're grabbing you and throwing you. They're taking phones and smashing them. It's getting insane.
One question is how gender plays into this. I'm guessing these 25% of the row that are more aggressive are male. Is that
Yeah,
true?
there are some females in there, but they're definitely right. A higher percent are male. Yeah, than would you find in the white veil group. Yeah.
And how about on many of your other questions? Did you see much of a gender disparity within the ROW group, or?
Yeah, surprisingly less than we thought. Yeah, I thought there would be more, but this religion of whiteness is almost 50-50 in terms of the followers. It's just that they differ a little bit in which category within that they are.
I'm sure you've taken notice that all of the right-wing media, Drudge Report, Daily Mail, New York Post, who else did I miss? And Fox News, obviously, have hopped on this idea of combing this white woman who was murdered, shot in the face, focusing on whether or not she had a criminal past. So my question to you is that in your public-facing conversations or your lectures, are you including that and drawing the parallel between what happens when non-Black people are murdered by militarized police? How quickly this white woman became a dreg of society with a criminal past. Are you noticing that, and are you speaking to that?
Yeah. So in the book Religion of Whiteness, we have a chapter where we follow about 8 white folks who were practicing Christians working in the Christian world. Sometimes they're pastors, sometimes they're working in seminaries or Christian colleges, and they refuse to practice the religion of whiteness. And we follow what happens to them. And in every case, they get demonized. And then Tanya, I'll get directly to you, but I want to use this as the first example. They get demonized, they get shunned, they get ridiculed, and in every case, so extreme that they end up resigning, but they also end up leaving the state, whatever state they were in, and starting life over because the shunning is so complete. And so they become so ostracized that they can't even operate in the community anymore. Same thing here. So I was watching Fox News the very night that Renee Good was shot. And on the major show, the most watched show on Fox, they lead with, well, we have this lesbian woman, and they start listing all the things that are violations of their understanding of who a human being should be to other her. And that's exactly what happens. You will be othered, and you are not protected if you are white. You're only protected if you're white and you adopt the religion of whiteness view, the Christian nationalist view.
You mentioned the different narrative to reach our goal. And when we look at the religion of whiteness, they have a very clear goal. So what is the goal of us? Like, what is our goal that we need the narrative to reach?
The religion of whiteness goal, the Christian nationalist goal, is a undiverse society. I think our goal is a diverse, pluralist society, and that is what we are working towards. It's pretty easy to justify that in all of our constitution, our history, right? E pluribus unum, out of many one. That's what we're supposed to be. And I think that's our ultimate goal. How can diverse people live amongst each other and all thrive and live their lives? That should be our goal.
Yeah. Anything else strike you as you've been in Minneapolis and St. Paul these past couple weeks?
I'm watching, like, when this kind of stuff happens, do you push back? So, we have the strategy, right, of you see when ICE shows up somewhere, people come with their whistles, they try to video with their phones, they honk their horns. I'm wondering if that works. Because what ICE is doing is adapting to that, and it's making them angrier and angrier. And so they're ramping up what they're doing, as I mentioned before. I wonder if we need a different strategy than just blowing whistles.
Yeah, we had Catherine Stewart visited us. She's was a Santa Barbara resident and visited with us a few months back, and she told us a little bit about the history of Christian nationalism. And I was wondering how the history figures into some of the research you're doing. Are you looking just kind of at today, or have you looked back over time in some way?
Yeah, definitely. So you have to understand history to understand now. So religion of whiteness has been something brewing, like from the very founding. If you go right to our Constitution, who can be an American? You had to be white. You had to be a white person of good moral character, which meant you had to be basically Christian or follow Christian values. So, in a way, when Trump says "Make America Great Again," he can argue that's what we were founded to be, a white nation that is good moral character. Now, we know Trump doesn't have that necessarily, but he'll still make the argument. So what's happened though is that this has been growing over time. It's been institutionalized. It's been infiltrating white Christian churches. Like, it wasn't initially there, but it has grown over time, and it's become to fruition in very powerful ways, right, in the last 10 years or so.
Bonnie is asking if you've presented this information or spoken to, white Christian groups, and how, if you did, how did they react? How do they respond to this or respond to your book?
Yeah. So I've been invited to a few, like, speaking at denominational meetings. So there'll be thousands of people there, and always you get the same reaction. People of color will give me a standing ovation, and white people will write me nasty letters for a very long time after. That's pretty much how it's happened. Yeah.
Have you found the need to have security with you?
I have graduate students who tell me they, like, follow what's going on in social media, and they'll tell me, don't go here, don't go there, don't go on this. But I haven't hired any security yet.
When you said that the whiteness is infiltrating, other Christian churches, is it just that other Christian churches are receding, becoming less in number, and that the only thing that is left are the white Christian churches?
It's a great question. This is part of what's been happening. Yes, because one of the things I'll say, and I've written on this, where I'll say evangelicalism has won, meaning within Catholicism, within mainline kind of progressive religion, what's happened is they're losing members at the fastest rate. But who remains? The ones who are most similar in values and action to conservative evangelical Christians. So it becomes more and more hardened, and less room to have diverse views. Basically, the fusion of whiteness, Christianity, and Republican become all the same.
I was wondering how basic anti-Semitism is to the core value of the group. Is that really such an integral part that we just have to expect that?
Is anti-Semitism a part of the religion of whiteness, are you asking?
Yes.
Yeah. It is that's a wonderful question, because scripturally, you'll see that part of being a religion of whiteness practitioner is that you support Israel at all costs. And this is because of a prediction that for the fruition and for Christ to come back, there must be an Israel. So you support it, you support the idea and the nation, even as you oppose the people and the practice, if that makes any sense. So it's both anti-Semitism and support, sold out, complete support of Israel as a political entity. Somebody else asked a really important question also about, like, do we see this in Europe? There is an outstanding book called The Godless Crusade, written by actually an elected member of the European Parliament and a trained theologian. And he compares the United States to several European countries. And he says, you find this kind of conservative movement, this nationalist movement that's race-based, growing everywhere in Europe. But there's a difference. In Europe, the Christian churches, the leaders, the bishops, and so on, oppose it. In the US, they're the main supporters of it. So in Europe, that's why he says it's a godless crusade. They say it's Christian nationalism. What they're really saying is we want French people to be French, and French means we're white, or German means we're white. But the Christians that are practicing there don't subscribe to it. Here, they do. In fact, they're the main subscribers of it.
Yeah, I'm just reacting to the last person on the panel who brought up anti-Semitism, and that brings another question to Michael. How do white Christian nationalists square their issue with anti-Semitism? In particular, I mean, I'm almost 58 years old, and I thought I could make it to the end of the line without having to know what a groyper is, right? Okay. You've got right-wing, very public, huge platform folks like Ben Shapiro, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like the late Charlie Kirk, all in opposition to I guess Nick Fuentes and the rise of groypers. I don't see the conflict. I don't see the issue as a non-Black American when you have such hostility towards anyone who is not white in this nation, especially if you're a white Christian nationalist. Groypers are just going one group further. They're just taking it to the logical conclusion. There is no conflict. It's just hating one extra group. There's no problem. There is no problem. So I don't understand white Christian nationalists' issue with it. And perhaps you can explain.
Sure. Could you tell
us what a groyper is?
Yeah, could you tell people what a groyper is? They may not know.
Oh, sure. Does everyone know who Nick Fuentes is?
No, I don't know.
Oh, okay. He's huge. He's in terms of his rise, he's getting to be as huge as Ben Shapiro. It's primarily Nick Fuentes is a self-proclaimed incel. Do we all know what an incel is? Okay. He is a white supremacist. He has all the psychosis of your average white American when it comes to this fantasy of white supremacy. Okay. He is very pro-Trump, but Trump is not hateful enough because he does not hate Israel and he does not hate Jews. And I understand that. What's the problem? When you have this level of inhumanity towards other human beings in this nation, they're just taking it they're just being consistent.
Yeah.
So this is a guy who's even taken it further.
Yeah, and he's got a huge following, and it's out there in the atmosphere that it might have been. Well, I won't get into what these crowds think in terms of who shot Charlie Kirk in the face or in the neck, but there's a divide. Let's just put it that way between hateful white Americans who are groypers, who are purists, and they feel that white Christian nationalists aren't pure enough. And I understand that. It makes total logical sense.
Yeah. The reason you have that divide is that you have, as again, that huge group of people that say that you have one exception, that you must defend the state of Israel. That's where they're having this divide. And you're right. To be totally consistent, you wouldn't support Israel either. But because it becomes important in the religion of whiteness, selectively interpreting scripture, they can't take that next step that you're saying. But some are because they're rejecting that teaching in the scripture.
I want to ask a question about the anti-Semitism part and how it works with, I guess we can say Christian Zionist and nation like whiteness religion. Do you think that anti-Semitism in Europe and United States served the prophecy to build and improve Israel? Because technically it makes people run away, like the Jewish people run away from US and Europe to Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I'm understanding your question right, yeah, just so if you don't know what a Zionist is, that Israel has the right and must exist at all costs, even if you have to annihilate everybody else around it. And many religion of whiteness practitioners have said, believe that. Believe that because, again, the fulfillment ultimately of Jesus coming back and establishing the kingdom of God on earth requires that you must have the nation of Israel. Again, it doesn't mean they don't want Israel folks to stay Jewish. They want them to convert to Christianity, but they want the nation to be there.
A lot of the Jewish friends that I have here in Santa Barbara are just the kind that they wouldn't like. We hate Netanyahu. We hate the government of Israel, even though I have many, many first cousins and second cousins living there because they left Germany and that was the place they could go and get themselves established. But we want help for the Gazans. We think that what the Jewish government has done to Gaza is terrible. So I guess we would be even worse than just Jews. We're the worst kind of Jews.
The worst kind of Jews, the sellouts.
Yeah.
Michael, one other question I have is, and maybe if it's too personal, don't answer it, but just wondering, like, and how you grew up, and did you grow up with a religious tradition, and how did that inform what you were interested in studying and the nature of your research?
Yeah, I did grow up in a religious, Christianity, conservative Christianity, and pretty much everybody in my family. We had a big change in our family when we were young, married. We grew up in an all-white world, but we moved to a African American neighborhood first in Minneapolis, then Houston, then Chicago, and we started to see the world in very different ways, and that has led to kind of this line of research, and it just keeps growing as the more you find, the more there is. So that's the background plus the change in life has led to this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's funny. My husband and I, particularly since retirement, have been doing a lot of traveling to parts of the world I frankly didn't even know about. We've been to Turkmenistan. Well, now you hear something on the news about Turkmenistan. It's like, oh, what's happening there? It's like all of a sudden, you've been there, you care. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that's all the questions we have at this time. I really want to thank you for talking with us, taking your time out on a Saturday afternoon to be here, sharing what's going on with Minneapolis. Again, your book is called The Religion of Whiteness, How Racism Distorts Christian Faith, and encourage everybody to get a copy and read it. Thank you.